Okay, let's go back to one of our top stories in Zimbabwe. Ex-President Robert Mugabe is stepping down, and Ayesha Kajee is the Executive Director of the Freedom of Expression Institute. She is also a researcher at the South African Institute of International Affairs and joins me now. Ayesha, thanks so much for being on the show. Now, when we spoke on Sunday, it looked like President Mugabe wasn't going anywhere. How surprised were you about the events of today, and how do you feel about them?
Well, I think like everybody, I was very, very taken aback. Surprised is perhaps too mild a word, but delighted for my peers and colleagues in Zimbabwe, of course, and don't blame them at all for their jubilation on the streets today. However, as an analyst, of course, one must take a step back and try to posit where Zimbabwe will go to now, and that doesn't look as good as perhaps it could have been. Senior members of the ruling party are saying that they're going to go it alone, that there is going to be no government of national unity, unfortunately. However, there will be elections called. They have to be called by September next year. It seems likely that former Vice President Mnangagwa will take over until then, even though there is a little bit of uncertainty about that as to whether the Vice President that Mr. Mugabe had actually put into place after firing Mr. Mnangagwa will take over, or whether there will be a sort of succession to Mr. Mnangagwa, and then, of course, elections called hopefully well before September next year, because it is a chance to start a new era, a new chapter in Zimbabwe's history, and it is to be hoped that the hardliners who will now be in charge of the party and therefore in charge of the country will see that it is time to break with the tradition of authoritarian governance with which this country has so long been associated.
And Ayesha, how free and fair do you think these elections would be? And another question, if elections, were held, you're saying they're going to be held, would ZANU-PF still retain power?
I think it's likely that ZANU-PF will be forced into some kind of a power-sharing agreement, certainly with Mr. Mugabe gone, and certainly if the army does not take a hard line and the security forces do not come back to strike against the opposition as they have in the past, then it's quite likely that ZANU-PF will find itself with something of a hung parliament in the event of free and fair elections. But that is only if the climate leading up to such elections, as well as the elections themselves, are truly free and fair. And of course, we haven't seen a free and fair election in Zimbabwe since before the 2000 elections. So this is not a country that can easily rebuild that democratic norm into the way it conducts elections. There is already a very, very tight melding of state and party in terms of government bureaucracy, parastatals, etc. But all is not doom and gloom, because this is a country that's rich in resources, and not least is the resource of its very, very resilient and fairly well-educated population.
Absolutely, absolutely. And that's something that is such of a benefit to Zimbabwe. Okay, we'll have to leave it there. Hope to speak to you again soon, Ayesha. That's Ayesha Kajee, the Executive Director of the Freedom of Expression Institute.